Many of you are very knowledgeable about the rules, but I figured I would give you some views of Title III that I don't think are obvious. People think they read the statute and understand it, and I'm always surprised when Jason and Woody and Richard and I are on the road that some of the things that we take for granted now are just not fully appreciated and understood, particularly in the context of fraud and fraud prevention. I think of fraud in three different ways. There's theft of money, which I think is the one that we concern ourselves most with. There is disclosure that's not consistent with the federal and state securities laws in that it's not full, or there's omissions. And then there's it's a derivative of theft, which is the misapplication of use of proceeds. And that's the one that I think practically is the one that's most likely to be a concern in this industry, because truthfully, it's true with my public companies and all of the other private companies, even the ones that are venture-backed that think they're watching the money, and they really aren't, not too well anyway. So Title III, I think, has a few different provisions in it which respond to some of that. The first one is the statutory construct, unlike Title II, and it's often confused, and we were talking about it earlier, is it's not a full general solicitation. It's a partial general solicitation, meaning that the entrepreneur can announce to the world that they're doing a crowdfunding campaign, and you can go visit any one of the funding platforms, and that's the extent of what they can say. That's it. And the funding platform can announce to the world that it's in business and has lots of interesting deals on its site, but it may not generally market any particular deal. That is actually very interesting because it means the only people who are going to show up at the front door to register to go in that funding platform are people who are actually highly motivated. A funding platform does not have registered reps like a broker-dealer does. There's nobody being paid to make people come to the site. You can't pay for lead generation. So the only people in the Title III environment that are really showing up are people who are highly interested and motivated. Then they have to register, and that's an involved process. They have to go through an education process, the likes of which does not exist in any other securities program that I'm involved with. We represent 50 public companies. We're a top IPO law firm in this country. We represent a nationwide footprint of broker-dealers, and nobody is going to have to take investors through an education process, the likes of which we have been negotiating, discussing with the SEC and FINRA for the better part of a year and a half. That is an important fact because it responds to my first concern about fraud, which is that people won't know what it is that they're investing in. I don't believe that for a second. I think and it's not going to be a check-the-box sort of education. There are going to be video clips, there are going to be hyperlinks, and people may actually have to fill out surveys and do different things. And the time from registration to pushing the button to invest is critical. The less time, the higher the litigation profile, the more time, the more likely that we're going to have a digitally recorded database of information that substantiates that the people actually know what they were investing in, and therefore no fraud, technical fraud in that sense. The next thing is, and there will be some issues of compliance on caps, whether it's the 5%, the 10%, or the $100,000 12-month rolling caps. And there are solutions that are being built out technologically that are important that I'm going to address in one second. And it plays into making sure that we have use of proceeds compliance. Use of proceeds compliance, like I said earlier, is of paramount importance to me. As Jason mentioned, it is not good enough from my point of view that we do things the way they're done currently. They have to be done better because it's a more sensitive class of investors that are participating. And truthfully, since my name is associated with this in a big way, I don't want to get egg on my face because we did it to a lesser standard than what's done here in the Valley or elsewhere. So use of proceeds, there are people building out technology solutions to enable investors on a post-financing basis to see what's going on with the entrepreneur and how they're spending the money. Sometimes it'll be aggregated data flow. There was a great conversation I had with Kevin yesterday where he had an alternative solution for monitoring how the money is spent. But how that money is spent and monitoring in a transparent way after the money has been raised is critical here. And even if it's simple Sarbanes-Oxley-like certifications, after you've raised the money so that the entrepreneur is resensitized to the importance of spending the money the way you said you're going to spend the money, I think that that's going to be a huge prevention from people spending it incorrectly, as well as flaw in statute in Title III, no entrepreneurial education, not required. These are young entrepreneurs. They are not necessarily serial entrepreneurs who are very successful. So a lot of the crowdfunding platforms we're involved with are actually going to impose an entrepreneurial certification as well as education. And I think that that will reduce a lot of the problems that may be of concern to many of the people in this room. So those are the things that I think you need to focus on in understanding why it's not going to be easy to commit fraud. Might somebody throw up a funding platform that is not actually regulated by the SEC and FINRA? It's possible. That's their purview. They need to monitor that carefully, although we are going to have links to the FINRA site, hopefully, and I hope FINRA actually requires it so you can see who's actually authorized and licensed to participate in this world. We're encouraging them to require that. As well as before a funding platform can go live and start doing business, assuming Title III goes live at some point in the future, that architecture has to be fully designed and approved by FINRA before you can do business in that environment. And it's going to be low human intervention. So when and if there's a problem, as there inevitably will, the state and federal regulators will be able to audit the entire relationship and the transaction, unlike in the broker-dealer model today where there's a lot of he said, she said.
Let's do some Q&A, and then we're going to get on to the reception here. Is there any questions?
I'm exploiting my position, Doug. So one of the benefits, I think, of crowdfunding is this increased diversity in financial services. And if you are a new business going to market, any entrepreneurs in the room will know, you really kind of want to limit the expenditure and the time that goes in before you can start operating. So my issue with the you must build the entire platform and get all your T's and C's from the lawyers and do all that is it's 9 months and it's a huge amount of money at work at risk without knowing if you're going to get your approval. Do you think there's any other alternative solution to build the entire thing before you submit it? Because I think that's going to limit competition. That's a barrier to entry.
That particular point I'm not very sensitive to. I think that if you want to be in the capital formation business, you have a responsibility to do things correctly. I think standards matter. Rule of law actually does matter. Investor protections matter. And so while it won't be a 9-month process in this country. In fact, we've worked with FINRA to streamline it. It'll be broker-dealer light, and broker-dealers take 6 months and a meaningful amount of money. I believe this will happen in 3 to 4 months from what I'm understanding from our conversations. But it won't be inexpensive, nor do I want it to be. I want there to be a full throttle responsibility on the people involved to make sure that they're doing what they need to do so that, as I said before, I don't get egg on my face.
Question for you. I've just come from Moscow, where I was doing a bit of advising to the Russian government on their new crowdfunding initiative. How would you design the U.S. system differently for an environment where the potential fraud rate is much, much higher? So is there a fundamental differently approach you have to take for very high fraud environments such as Russia, Nigeria, vis-a-vis the U.S.? Or are you assuming that because this is going to be online, it's the same fraud environment globally everywhere?
That's a great question, and I haven't spent enough time thinking about that, actually. I'll start with what I think is a total misunderstood reality. I don't think there is a lot of fraud in the U.S. market. I don't think there's a lot of litigation tied to private placement finance, friends and family venture at all, notwithstanding the legitimate regulatory focus and concern about it. It doesn't happen all that often. Versus what goes on in our public markets all the time on a very large scale. And it's not just the way documents are written. It's actual theft or meaningful fraud. So the answer I would give you is I think the caps in Title III are my favorite aspect of the statute. I think it means that we're, as a society, going to empower entrepreneurs to raise money and investors to invest money, but we're going to do it in a way based upon suitability standards that we've lived with in the broker-dealer world for a long time. that you can't put too much of your net worth in a deal, and therefore it won't change the way you live if you lose all of that money, which statistically you will. I don't shy from that conversation.
Okay, one last question, and then we're going to head out.
By the way, in friends and family finance in this country, they lose a ton of money all the time. It just happens to be that the federal regulators have no visibility on those statistics because it's an exempt transaction.
Very few entrepreneurial ventures get to success without changing their strategy. So you've laid out a scenario whereby you have to really lay out exactly what you're going to do. Will they give the money back? Will they ask for permission to change?
So in our standard private placements today, that just happen not to be online, you do have disclosure on occasion that permits the entrepreneur to pivot, as you're pointing out. What I would prefer in this environment to see happen, well, I'm fine with that same concept applying here to some degree. I think at a certain point, depending on how much money's left and what percentage of the raise that is, if they want to pivot, they ought to go back if it's a meaningful pivot, as opposed to it is a slightly different variation on, it's a gaming concept, and they're going to do a different type of game, because now the marketing research says it should be geared towards women rather than men. That doesn't really change my point of view. It's not a fundamental change to the investment, to the opportunity. But you can. The great thing about being online is it's pretty easy to go back to people, and rather than have them be upset with you, seek their permission again. And if they say no, give back the money, because the next time you want to raise money, you'll raise twice as much because you were honorable.
Excellent point. Thank you, Doug. So this almost concludes the first day of the academic symposium. We do have a wine reception, which will be starting in a couple of minutes. And about 6:15, our staff are going to escort you to the Hearst Mining Building, where the dinner will be served. We don't want you to get lost. There's no straight lines in Berkeley. I don't know if you've noticed that, but everything is a curve. I've been here 4 months and I still get lost, so it takes a while. Interesting difference in perspectives. Dr. Song talking about two different types of registration schemes, possibly exemption from registration and liability, advocation of some more strict schemes. Now, those of you that are industry practitioners, you need to understand what Jason and Woody said in their presentation. Title III rules may be released next week. I don't know if, did any of you hear that? Okay, so I'm going to say it again. It's coming. So this is the non-academic side of me, an enthusiastic entrepreneur coming out, that there's going to be rules released very quickly that we can respond to, react to, and these are going to be proposed rules, and there's a comment period. And I received a call from the SEC last week specifically asking me to ask you the following. Dear academics, please comment. And I'm not joking when I'm saying that. I was asked by the SEC to communicate to you their strong desire that this community of academics join together and give them some reasoned opinions, because they get a lot of unreasoned opinions on the public comment site. And they would very much appreciate it if the economists, econometricists, finance experts, and the assembled scholars here would take some time and give them some very thoughtful comments on these proposed rules. And so this is a literal request that I'm passing on from the SEC right now. Please take a look at the proposed rules and think about the impacts of this framework. I mean, the Korean model, as I understand it, essentially forces crowdfunding to be early stage startups, and existing companies are not going to have access to that market. There's a huge policy implication of these regulations, and this affects the access to capital that exists. That also means those of you that would like to do some research on Title III, you're approximately 6 months away from seeing transactions, which means you're 18 months away from having the potential of liquidity in the market. So it's time to start doing your research design now. So with that, may I invite you to have some wine, and thank you.